At 81 years old, Michael Douglas isn't chasing headlines anymore. Instead, he's reflecting on decades of friendship, rivalry, admiration, and the complicated truth behind one of Hollywood's most respected filmmakers, Rob Reiner. For years, Rob Reiner has carried a public image that seems almost untouchable. The beloved director behind cultural landmarks like When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men, and The Princess Bride is often portrayed as one of Hollywood's most thoughtful storytellers. To audiences, Reiner represents warmth, humor, and the golden age of intelligent filmmaking. His reputation has been shaped by iconic films and decades of influence. But as Michael Douglas now suggests in rare reflective conversations, the real story behind Rob Reiner is far more layered than the polished Hollywood portrait. Douglas has spent his life navigating the same industry that shaped Reiner. As the son of legendary actor Kirk Douglas, Michael grew up inside Hollywood's inner circle. He understands the difference between the public performance and the private reality better than most. And over the decades, Douglas and Reiner crossed paths repeatedly, sometimes as collaborators, sometimes as observers of each other's careers, and always as two men shaped by the same unpredictable industry. According to Douglas, what people see in Rob Reiner, the easygoing storyteller, the confident director, is only part of the picture. Behind the camera, Douglas describes a man intensely passionate about his work, someone who carried the emotional weight of every project. Reiner wasn't simply directing movies. He was wrestling with ideas about morality, power, and human nature. Films like A Few Good Men weren't just courtroom dramas. They were reflections of deeper questions about authority and accountability. Douglas has hinted that Reiner's drive could sometimes be misunderstood. To outsiders, Reiner appeared relaxed and humorous. But in reality, Douglas suggests there was a constant pressure behind the scenes, a filmmaker determined to get every detail right, even if it meant exhausting himself and everyone around him. Hollywood often celebrates the finished masterpiece but rarely acknowledges the emotional toll it takes to create one. And then there were the quiet moments that audiences never saw. Douglas recalls conversations between industry veterans, the kind that happened far away from film sets and press interviews. In those moments, the glamorous world of Hollywood faded away, revealing something more human. Directors and actors spoke openly about fear, expectations, and the uncertainty of staying relevant in an industry that constantly reinvents itself. For Douglas, those conversations with figures like Reiner were deeply personal. He had already experienced his own share of career highs and personal struggles, from producing One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest to battling serious health challenges later in life. These experiences gave Douglas a unique perspective on what it truly means to survive in Hollywood for half a century. That's why, when Douglas reflects on Rob Reiner today, he doesn't simply talk about films. He talks about endurance, about what it takes to remain creative while the world changes around you. In Douglas's view, Reiner represents a generation of filmmakers who believed cinema could challenge audiences, provoke conversations, and even reshape culture. But Douglas also acknowledges that the Hollywood system itself has changed dramatically. The industry that once encouraged bold storytelling now moves at the speed of algorithms and streaming metrics. Directors like Reiner came from an era where filmmakers fought passionately for stories they believed in. Today, Douglas suggests, that kind of creative battle is becoming increasingly rare. This shift, Douglas believes, is part of the deeper story behind Rob Reiner's legacy. It's not just about the movies he made, it's about the mindset he represented. Reiner belonged to a time when filmmakers weren't simply entertainers. They were cultural commentators, using cinema to explore questions about power, relationships, and society itself. And perhaps that's why Douglas speaks about Reiner with such reflective honesty now. At 81, Douglas understands something that younger actors and directors often don't. Time eventually reveals the true meaning of a career. Awards fade. Box office numbers become trivia. What remains are the stories, and the people who had the courage to tell them. When Douglas looks back on Rob Reiner, he sees more than just a successful director. He sees someone who helped define an era of Hollywood storytelling, someone who carried the responsibility of shaping how audiences saw love, justice, and friendship on screen. In a way, Douglas's reflections are less about exposing secrets and more about understanding legacy. The truth about Rob Reiner isn't scandalous or shocking. Instead, it's something quieter and perhaps more meaningful, the story of a filmmaker who believed deeply in the power of storytelling, even when the industry around him changed. And as Douglas himself reaches the later chapters of his life, that realization carries a certain weight. Because in Hollywood, where careers can disappear overnight, very few artists leave behind stories that continue to resonate decades later. Rob Reiner is one of those rare exceptions. And if Michael Douglas's reflections tell us anything, it's this: behind every legendary film lies years of unseen struggle, creative risk, and personal sacrifice. The audience sees the finished masterpiece, but the real story belongs to the people who lived it. In the end, the truth about Rob Reiner may not be a secret at all. It's simply the story of a man who believed that stories mattered.